I can still hear my son's words echoing in my mind. "You're a burden, mother. You only deserve the scraps." That was 2 years ago, as I watched him deposit $100,000 into his mother-in-law's account, right in front of me, on my 65th birthday. He looked me straight in the eye through his phone screen, showing off the transfer receipt, before handing me a card with a $10 gift certificate. I always believed the bond between a mother and son was sacred, unbreakable. At 65 years old, I learned in the most painful way that this was just an illusion I had been nurturing. Richard was my only son, born when I was 23. His father disappeared before he was even born, leaving me alone with a baby and debts that took me years to pay off. A lifelong public servant, I saved every last penny I could. While other women my age were updating their wardrobes, traveling, or allowing themselves small luxuries, I invested everything in Richard. Private school, English courses, a study abroad program in his teens, a medical degree without a single loan. I lived in a modest apartment on the outskirts of Columbus. I drove the same car for 15 years and rarely bought new clothes. All so my son could have the best. And he did. Richard graduated with honors and specialized in neurosurgery, with my money paying for every tuition bill, every book, every instrument. When he returned from his residency, he was a different man. He met Camille, the daughter of an influential businessman, and began moving in social circles I would never have access to. At first, Camille was polite to me. She would smile during Sunday lunches and bring small gifts on special occasions. But her smile never reached her eyes. "You need to update that look," she'd say, analyzing my simple clothes. "Richard socializes with important people now." Richard's visits became drastically less frequent after the wedding. We went from weekly lunches to monthly meetings, then to quick calls on holidays. When I called, he was always busy. "I can't talk right now, Mother. I have patients waiting." Even when I needed help, like when I was hospitalized with pneumonia, he sent me money for a cab instead of coming to get me. "I hired a nurse for you," he told me over the phone. "I can't cancel my surgeries." The nurse never showed up. The event that changed everything happened on my 65th birthday. Richard and Camille showed up at my apartment unannounced. For a moment, I felt a spark of hope. Maybe they had remembered after all. "Mother, we need to talk," Richard said, sitting on my worn-out sofa without even taking off his coat, as if he feared poverty was contagious. Camille remained standing, staring at her phone, clearly bored to be there. "We're buying a new house in Beverly Hills," he announced, without even asking how I was. 3-bedroom suites, a heated pool, a gym. It's an important investment for our professional image. "How wonderful, son," I replied, genuinely happy for him, despite everything. "Yes, it's essential to be in the right place, to know the right people," Camille finally spoke, looking up from her phone. "My mother has been guiding us on that. She knows everyone who matters in the city." Richard picked up his phone and turned the screen towards me. "I just transferred $100,000 to Mrs. Regina, Camille's mother. A small thank you for everything she's done for us." I froze. $100,000, more than I could save in 5 full years of work. "How generous of you," I managed to say, my voice trembling. "It's the least we could do," Camille replied with disdain. Mum introduced us to the real estate agent, the architect. She organized dinners with important neighbors. She understands social relationships, networking, unlike someone who only knows the life of a government office. Richard not only failed to defend me, but nodded in agreement with every humiliating word. "Regina has vision, Mother. She knows how to build strategic relationships." Then, as if remembering something trivial, he pulled a small envelope from his pocket. "For you," he said, holding it out to me. Happy birthday? It's what the scraps deserve. The air left my lungs. Scraps? I, who had sacrificed everything for him, only deserved scraps? My hands shook as I took the envelope. The world seemed to spin around me as I opened it. It was a $10 gift certificate to a department store. $10, while his mother-in-law received $100,000. I thought you could buy something to look more presentable, Richard added, critically eyeing my simple blouse. Whenever we go to an event, I'm embarrassed by your old-fashioned appearance. The words hit me like a slap. I thanked him mechanically, holding back tears. Richard, we have to go, Camille said, looking at her watch. We have the cocktail party at the Bradfords' house at 8. Yes, of course. He stood up hastily. Oh, Mother, I've been thinking. This apartment is too big for you alone. 2 bedrooms. What for? You could sell it, buy something smaller, and use the money for, I don't know, plastic surgery or something. Plastic surgery? I repeated, incredulous. Yes, you're aging noticeably. It would be good for your self-esteem. And honestly, it would also be better for me when I have to introduce you to someone important. Camille smiled for the first time during the visit. I know an excellent clinic that accepts patients of your age. It's in a more remote neighborhood, but I'm sure you wouldn't mind the location, considering the discount. And there are also those retirement communities, Richard continued, as if talking about the weather. They're practical. You wouldn't have to worry about a thing. You'd have company of your own kind. My own kind? I asked, feeling something break inside me. Simple people, retired civil servants, people you have more in common with. He glanced at his watch. We really have to go. Think about what I said, okay? This apartment is a waste. Before leaving, he paused at the door. Oh, and Mother, next time you need something, call my secretary, all right? My phone gets filled with important notifications, and sometimes your messages end up distracting me from urgent matters. After they left, I collapsed on the sofa, staring at the $10 gift certificate in one hand and the weight of decades of despised sacrifice in the other. The tears came uncontrollably. That night marked the end of the mother Richard knew, the woman who accepted everything, who made herself small so he could shine, who swallowed insults with a smile. In her place, a version of myself I had never known was born, a woman who finally saw her own worth. I didn't sleep that night. Between tears of humiliation and rage, I spent hours analyzing every moment of my life where I put Richard's needs above my own. Every promotion I turned down because it would require frequent travel. Every relationship I gave up because Richard needed my exclusive attention. Every dream postponed indefinitely. And for what? To raise a son who looked at me as if I were a walking embarrassment, who transferred $100,000 to his mother-in-law while giving me a $10 gift certificate, who suggested I get plastic surgery so I wouldn't embarrass him. The next morning, with my eyes still swollen, I made the first decision of my new life. I opened my laptop and logged into my bank's app. On the screen, my account balance, $800,000. Richard had no idea how much I had saved. For years, I had lied about my financial situation, partly because I didn't want him to know I could help him even more, which he would certainly demand, partly because I learned early on that when people think you have money, they start treating you differently. As a high-ranking public servant, my salary was comfortable, especially for someone with frugal habits like mine. But to Richard, I was just a retired civil servant, a category he obviously despised, as he made clear by suggesting I should live with people of my own kind. I transferred $50,000 to my checking account and scheduled a consultation with an investment advisor for the next day. It was time to make my money work for me, not for my ungrateful son. In the following days, I immersed myself in a world that had always been within my reach, but which I had never explored. I reorganized my investments, diversified my portfolio, and studied personal finance. At night, I watched videos on financial literacy, read books, and participated in webinars. My mind, always sharp but underutilized in recent years, absorbed knowledge with an insatiable thirst. Richard called 3 times during that period. The first time, he wanted to know if I had considered his suggestions. The second, he needed me to co-sign some papers for a loan for medical equipment. The third, he wanted me to watch his house during a trip. "That won't be possible, Richard," I replied to his last request. "I have commitments." The silence on the other end of the line was telling. My son was not used to hearing no from me. "Commitments? You barely leave the house." "Things change, son." He laughed in that condescending way he had adopted since marrying Camille. "Let me guess. Bingo with the neighbors? Or is it a special soap opera night?" I let the insult pass without comment. "I have important meetings." "Meetings? You? With whom?" "With people of my own kind," I replied, using his own words against him. He was silent for a moment. "Look, if you're upset about that conversation about the apartment—" "I'm not upset, Richard. I'm busy. Have a good trip." I hung up before he could say anything else. It was the first time in decades that I had ended a conversation with my son on my own terms. The following month, I didn't answer his calls. He left increasingly irritated messages. "Mother, we need those papers signed. Why aren't you answering? This is childish of you." When I finally called him back, it was to tell him I would not co-sign any loan. "You've always been my co-signer," he protested, indignant. "And I'm still paying for a loan you stopped honoring in 2018, I replied calmly. "I'm not going to compromise my retirement with more of your debts." "What are you talking about? What retirement? You barely have enough to survive." "I have more than you imagine, Richard, and I intend to enjoy what I've earned." He was silent for a few seconds. "You have money saved and you never told me? While I was killing myself working to build my career?" The audacity left me momentarily speechless. This was the man whose entire education I had financed, whose apartment I had helped buy, whose first office I had furnished. "Who paid for your medical degree, Richard? Your study abroad? Your residency?" "That was your obligation," he replied, as if I had mentioned something as trivial as buying diapers for a baby. "I was your son, your investment, and now that I'm finally reaping the rewards of my effort, you're coming to me with this petty conversation about money?" I took a deep breath, containing the rage that threatened to consume me. "I'm not going to argue with you, Richard. My decision is made. I will not be a co-signer for anything else." "You're going to regret this," he threatened, his voice cold. "When you're sick and alone, don't come begging for my help." "Like when I had pneumonia and you sent money for a taxi instead of visiting me?" I asked softly. He hung up on me. That conversation, instead of hurting me, only solidified my resolve. 3 months after the birthday incident, I had a clear plan. My investments were performing exceptionally well. I hired a personal trainer to improve my health, a style consultant to revamp my wardrobe, and a real estate agent to find my dream home. "I want something that makes a statement," I explained to the agent. "Something that reflects success, security, and good taste." He showed me several properties, but it was the last one that captured my attention. A 3-suite house in a high-end residential community. Coincidentally, the same community where Richard and Camille had bought their house with the help of her mother. The property was listed for $1,500,000. "I'm going to make an offer," I decided that same day. $1,400,000 cash. The agent looked at me with a mixture of surprise and respect. Are you sure you can? So I am absolutely certain, I interrupted, opening my banking app and showing him the balance of my investment account, now considerably larger thanks to the successful trades of the last few months. The offer was accepted in 48 hours. I signed the papers without telling anyone, not even my best friend Vera, the only person I kept close during this transformation. I would only tell her when the time was right, and that time would be determined exclusively by me. 6 months after that fateful birthday, I was ready. The house had been completely decorated by one of the best interior designers in the city, nothing ostentatious, but unmistakably elegant and sophisticated. I bought a new car. I hired a housekeeper and a gardener. My wardrobe was entirely renewed, with pieces from brands that Camille and her mother loved to show off. It was then that I received an unexpected call from Richard. Mother, we need to talk about the apartment, he said, without even bothering to ask how I was. I found an interested buyer. A buyer for my apartment? I asked, genuinely confused. Yes? Remember we talked about that? About selling and buying something smaller? Well, I have a colleague who's looking for an investment property in that area. He offered a reasonable price, considering the state of the apartment. The audacity was impressive. And may I ask what this reasonable price would be? $200,000. It's a good deal, considering the building has no elevator and the paint is worn. The apartment was easily worth $450,000, even needing some renovations. Richard was shamelessly trying to swindle me. I'm not interested in selling, Richard. Mother, be reasonable, he sighed, as if dealing with a stubborn child. You don't need all that space, and frankly, it's becoming dangerous for someone your age to live alone in that neighborhood. I've already set aside a flat in a retirement community. It's small, but it has 24-hour monitoring and recreational activities suitable for you. Suitable for me? Yes, you know. Bingo, knitting, those things people your age like. There's even a Bible study group on Wednesdays, he added, as if offering an extraordinary benefit. I took a deep breath, containing my rage. Richard, I appreciate your concern, but I've already resolved my housing situation. What do you mean? He asked, clearly irritated by the turn of the conversation. I moved. You moved? To where? Why didn't you consult me? I didn't know I needed your permission to decide where to live, son, I replied calmly. It's not a matter of permission, it's a matter of common sense. You're 65 years old, living on a pension, and making major decisions without consulting anyone. So, where did you move to, anyway? To Beverly Hills. The silence on the other end of the line was absolute. Beverly Hills was exactly the community where he and Camille had recently bought their house, the most exclusive and expensive neighborhood in the city. Is this some kind of sick joke? He finally asked, his voice tense. No, son. I bought the house at number 38. By the way, I heard you're at number 24. We'll be neighbors. With what money? He almost shouted. With my money, Richard. Money I saved for decades while you treated me like a second-class citizen. That's impossible. You never had that kind of money. You're lying to provoke me. Why don't you come over for coffee tomorrow and see for yourself? I suggested, keeping my voice calm. 4 in the afternoon would be convenient. Bring Camille if you like. And your mother-in-law too. I'm sure Regina would love to see my new house. I hung up, feeling a satisfaction I hadn't experienced in years. The seed was planted. Now I just had to wait for the harvest. At 3:45 p.m. the next day, I positioned myself strategically on the balcony of my new home. I wanted to watch their arrival, to capture the exact moment reality would hit them. I was wearing a navy blue silk suit, discreet but visibly expensive jewelry, and my hair, now in a modern cut that highlighted my natural greys, was impeccable. At 3 minutes past 4 p.m., Richard's car came through the gate that the security guard opened after my prior authorization. I saw his confused look through the windshield as he drove slowly down the elegant street, searching for number 38. When he finally stopped in front of my house, his expression was priceless, a mixture of shock, disbelief, and something that almost looked like fear. Richard got out first, staring at the 3-story mansion with its meticulously manicured gardens as if it were an apparition. Camille got out right after, whispering something in his ear while pointing at details of the property. To my satisfaction, Regina, the mother-in-law who had received the $100,000, was in the back seat, her face contorted in an expression that could only be described as pure envy. "Mother?" Richard called out, still standing by the car as if afraid to get any closer. "Good afternoon, son," I replied calmly, walking down the steps to greet them. "Camille, Regina, welcome to my home." The three of them stood in silence for a few seconds, absorbing the sight of the mansion and, more disturbingly for them, the sight of me, no longer the elderly woman in simple clothes and a submissive posture, but an elegant, confident, clearly prosperous woman. "This is yours?" Richard finally managed to articulate, gesturing to the house. "Yes, son. I bought it 2 months ago. Come on, let's go inside. The housekeeper has prepared some delicious coffee." "Housekeeper?" Camille repeated, her voice an octave higher than usual. I led them up the stone path to the main entrance. As I opened the door, I revealed a breathtaking foyer with a marble floor, a curved staircase to the upper floors, and original artwork on the walls. "Helen, this is—" Regina began, clearly trying to mentally recalibrate the image she had of me. "It's beautiful, isn't it?" I finished, gesturing for them to follow me into the living room. "It cost a bit more than I initially planned, but the agent assured me it's an excellent investment. Properties in this neighborhood only appreciate in value." Richard was looking around as if in a fever dream. "Mother, I don't understand. Where did the money for this come from?" "From the same place everything in your life came from, Richard. From my work. But this must have cost $1,400,000, I informed him calmly. "I paid in cash." Richard nearly tripped over his own feet. "In cash? $1,400,000? That's impossible." "Why would it be impossible, son? I worked for 40 years, I saved, I invested. Unlike certain people I know, I never spent more than I could afford just to impress others." I noticed Camille's cheeks flush intensely. "But you lived in that simple apartment, drove that old car," Camille argued, as if my former simplicity was proof I was lying now. "I chose to live modestly, Camille, so my son could have everything I never did." I looked directly at Richard. "Private school, courses abroad, medical school, residency, none of that is cheap, as you well know." "You could have lived better," Richard murmured, still absorbing the shock. "All this time?" "I could have, but I prioritized you, Richard, something you clearly never learned to do for others." Yeah. The housekeeper entered with a tray of coffee, served in fine china, and pastries, carefully arranged. Regina stared at the cup set, which I recognized as being from the same brand she collected and frequently mentioned at family lunches. "Please, help yourselves," I offered, gracefully sitting in an armchair. "The pastries are from that French bakery downtown. The same one that catered your wedding, isn't that right, Camille?" Camille nodded mechanically, still looking around as if trying to find a flaw, something to prove this was all an elaborate hoax. "So, what do you think of the neighborhood?" I asked casually. "I heard you bought the house at number 24. It's near the community recreation area, isn't it?" "How did you pay for this?" Richard interrupted, ignoring my question. His voice was trembling with contained rage. And don't give me that story about savings. Nobody saves enough to buy a mansion like this. You'd be surprised what's possible when you don't spend money on frivolities, I replied calmly. Besides, I had help from an excellent financial advisor. A recommendation from a neighbor, by the way, the same one who helped Regina plan the purchase of that beach house you promised her. Regina choked on her coffee. No need to be embarrassed, Regina. Real estate investments are personal decisions. I just find it curious that my son would give $100,000 to his mother-in-law to buy a second home while suggesting his own mother move into a retirement community. Richard placed his cup on the table with enough force to crack the saucer. Are you trying to humiliate us? Is that it? Some kind of sick revenge? Humiliate? How so, son? All of this, he gestured widely. This house, these clothes, this attitude. You were always simple, modest. Now suddenly you're like this. Like what, Richard? Successful? Comfortable? Worthy of respect? I leaned forward, keeping my voice controlled. Or is the problem that now I can't be so easily dismissed? No one was dismissing you, he protested weakly. Weren't they? You could sell the apartment and get plastic surgery. Consider a home for people of your own kind. Call my secretary. Your messages distract me from important matters. That's not dismissing someone, Richard. What is it then? Camille intervened, trying to de-escalate the situation. Helen, we were just thinking of your well-being. A smaller place would be easier for you to manage on your own. And now I don't need to manage anything on my own, Camille. I have a housekeeper, a gardener, and a better security system than yours. All paid for with my money. The same money that financed my ungrateful son's successful career. Regina, who had been silently observing the standoff, finally spoke. You were saving money while living like a humble person? Why? Why not? Money doesn't need to be flaunted to have value, Regina. It needs to provide security, comfort, independence. Things I've discovered are far more important than appearances. Richard stood up abruptly. We have to go. You obviously planned all this to humiliate us. No, son. I planned this to show my worth. To myself, first and foremost. I paused, watching him tremble with rage. And I must say, it's working wonderfully. Camille hesitated, torn between following her husband and continuing to watch the spectacle of my transformation. You don't have to leave, I said softly. I haven't even shown you the upstairs. I have a guest suite I prepared with you in mind for when you want to spend the night. The irony was not lost on them. It was exactly the kind of comment they would make. A false offer of hospitality that we both knew would never be accepted. This is ridiculous, Richard muttered, walking toward the door. Come on, Camille, mother. Aren't you even going to ask how I managed to buy this house in the same neighborhood as you? I asked, following them calmly to the exit. Not even a little bit curious? Richard stopped, visibly fighting his curiosity. How? He asked finally, without turning around. I paid $100,000 more than the asking price, I replied with a smile. The seller had two similar offers, but he chose mine because he specifically wanted a distinguished lady like me to live here. Apparently, some new families in the neighborhood were making a negative impression with their ostentatious behavior. Richard turned around slowly, his face contorted with rage. Are you implying that— I'm not implying anything, son. I'm just sharing a fun fact. Regina cleared her throat, clearly uncomfortable. I think it's best we leave. Helen, thank you for the coffee. The pleasure was all mine, Regina. We should schedule lunch sometime. I can recommend an excellent financial consultant if you're still interested in that beach house. Her face turned red. From anger or shame, I wasn't sure. Probably both. After their departure, I watched from the window as they argued heatedly in the car. Richard was gesticulating furiously. Camille seemed to be trying to calm him, and Regina kept her gaze fixed on my house, her expression unreadable. I smiled, feeling a satisfaction I hadn't experienced in decades. The seed of discomfort was planted. Now, I just had to wait for it to grow. I didn't have to wait long. 3 days later, Richard showed up alone, unannounced. He had dark circles under his eyes. His hair was disheveled, an unusual sight for someone so obsessed with appearances. "Can we talk?" he asked, his voice devoid of its usual arrogance. I invited him in, leading him to the study this time, an elegant room with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves and a mahogany desk where I managed my investments. "Impressive," he commented, looking at the economics and finance books that filled an entire section. "You really are different." "I'm being myself, Richard, without shrinking to fit into other people's expectations." He sat in the leather armchair across from my desk, looking strangely small. "Why did you never tell me about the money?" "Why should I have? Did you show any genuine interest in my life over the past few years?" "I always cared about you," he protested weakly. "Caring is not the same as respect, son. You cared for me the way one cares for a child or a pet. Something to be looked after, not someone to be valued." He stared at his own hands for a long moment. "How much do you have, exactly?" I laughed without humor. "Is that what you came to ask? After everything?" "No, I'm trying to understand. You bought a house for almost $1.5 million in cash. How?" "Actually, I still have nearly $600,000 invested, aside from this house and my full pension as a career public servant." Richard visibly paled. $2 million in assets. You have $2 million in assets. Approximately, why? Does that change anything? "It changes everything," he almost shouted, standing up abruptly. "You could have helped us with the house, with the new office, with the equipment. Instead, you kept it all for yourself, while you let us struggle alone." The audacity was so astonishing that I was momentarily speechless. This was the man whose entire education I had financed, whose apartment I had helped buy, whose first office I had furnished. "Struggle alone?" I repeated finally. "Richard, I paid for your private school for 15 years. I paid for your medical degree in full. I paid for your residency in the United States. I made the down payment on your first apartment. I furnished your first office. When exactly did you struggle alone?" "That was in the beginning. Now I have bigger expenses, responsibilities, an image to maintain. And that's my problem because—" He stared at me, genuinely shocked by my response. For his entire life, I had always given in to his demands. I had always put his needs before my own. "You're my mother," he said finally, as if that explained everything. "Yes, I am your mother. Not your bank account, not your employee, not your doormat." "I never treated you like a doormat, did I?" "Mother, I need you to watch the house while we travel." "Mother, could you pick up my suit from the dry cleaners?" "Mother, I need you to co-sign this loan." Did you ever ask if I had other plans? If I wanted to do those things? If I had my own dreams? He didn't answer. "And when I needed you? When I got sick with pneumonia and you sent money for a cab instead of visiting? When I needed help fixing the leak in my apartment and you said you were too busy? When I asked you to have lunch with me on my birthday and you cancelled at the last minute because something important came up?" "You're being unfair," he protested, but without conviction. "I have a demanding career." "And I had a demanding life, Richard. Raising you alone, working 2 jobs, postponing my own dreams so you could achieve yours. And how did you thank me? By suggesting I get plastic surgery so you wouldn't be embarrassed." He had the decency to look ashamed. "That was unfortunate. I didn't mean it like that." But you said it. Just like you said I should move to a retirement home for people of my kind, as if I were some kind of second-class citizen. I was thinking about your safety, your well-being. No, Richard. You were thinking about how to get rid of an inconvenient mother who didn't fit into your new, glamorous life. I stood up, walking around the desk to stand in front of him. You became the exact type of person I always taught you not to be. Arrogant, materialistic, obsessed with status. Because of Camille? He asked, his voice suddenly defensive. Is that it? You never liked her? Camille is just a symptom, not the cause. You changed when you started to believe you were worth more than the people who helped you get where you are. When you started treating your own mother like a burden while idolizing your wife's family. Regina has important connections, Mother. She knows people who can open doors for my career. And what do I have, Richard? Unconditional love, decades of sacrifice, support at every step of your life. What is that worth to you? He didn't answer. The silence filled the space between us like an uncrossable chasm. Do you know why I bought this house? I finally asked. To humiliate me, obviously. To prove some point. No, son. I bought it because for the first time in 40 years, I decided to live for myself. I decided I deserved more than scraps from my own family's table. That I deserved respect, consideration, a place of honor in the life I helped build. Richard remained silent, but something in his eyes had changed. It was no longer just anger or indignation, but something more complex, perhaps the first glimmer of genuine understanding. What do you want from me then? He asked, his voice almost a whisper. I want you to see who I really am, Richard, not the image you created in your mind, a helpless, old-fashioned old woman, a weight to be carried. I want you to understand that human value isn't in how much money someone has, what connections they can offer, or what doors they can open. And what if I can't? He asked, suddenly vulnerable. What if it's too late? I looked at my son, this man I had raised, loved, sacrificed everything to protect, and I felt a mixture of sadness and determination. Then you will live with the consequences of your choices, Richard, just as I am living with mine. Richard's visit marked the beginning of a strange period in our lives. He didn't return in the following days, but I felt his presence. Or perhaps it's better to say, I felt the effects of his deliberate absence. Neighbors commented on seeing him driving slowly past my house, watching as if trying to reconcile the elegant mansion with the mother he had always considered irrelevant. A week later, I received an expensive bouquet of flowers with a simple card. We need to talk. Richard. I didn't respond. The flowers were beautiful, but they felt more like an attempt to buy his way in than a sincere apology. 3 days later, he tried again, this time with a box of fine chocolates from a French pastry shop I had mentioned liking years ago, long before he started treating me like a nuisance. The card read, Please, Mother, 5 minutes. I still didn't respond. It wasn't cruelty on my part, but self-preservation. For decades, I had allowed Richard to dictate the terms of our relationship. When he wanted attention, I gave it. When he needed help, I offered it. When he dismissed me, I accepted it silently. No more. If we were to rebuild any kind of relationship, it would be on more equal terms. On the 10th day of his official silence and the 20th gift delivery, now small daily tokens left with my housekeeper, I received an unexpected visitor. Camille was at my door, alone, visibly nervous. Helen, she greeted formally. Can we talk? I invited her in, observing how she seemed different, less arrogant, more restrained. Her gaze swept over every detail of the house with an expression that mixed reluctant admiration and something that looked almost like shame. Richard doesn't know I'm here, she confessed as we sat in the living room. He'd be furious if he knew. Why? I asked, genuinely curious. Because he's destroyed. Camille hesitated, choosing her words carefully. Not because of the money or the house, though that was a shock, but because he's finally realizing how he's treated you these past few years. Did he say that? Not in those exact words, but he's not sleeping well, barely eating. He spends his time looking at old photos of you two, from when he was a child. She paused. I found him crying in the study last night, looking at a picture of you from his 10th birthday party. That birthday, I had worked double shifts for 3 months to afford the party he wanted with all his friends from school. The memory brought a pang of pain. Richard is a proud man, Camille continued, maybe too proud. He doesn't know how to apologize, especially when he knows what he did is unforgivable. And you? I asked directly. Have you also realized anything about how you treated me? Camille blushed deeply. Yes, I was horrible to you, Helen. From the beginning, I treated you as if you were less important, less valuable, just because you didn't have the social status my family has, or that I thought it had. Thought. She gave a humorless smile. My mother has been furious since she found out about this house. Not with you, with my father. Apparently his solid investments aren't so solid after all. The company has been in trouble for years, and he hid it from her. Camille shook her head. The irony is that you, who always lived simply and honestly, have more financial security than my parents, who live by flaunting wealth. Money is deceptive, I commented. Often the ones who show it off the most have the least. I learned that the hard way. She hesitated, nervous. Helen, I know I don't deserve your forgiveness. I'm not even asking for it. I just came to say that Richard is genuinely sorry, even if he doesn't know how to express it. And what does he want now? My money? No. Camille seemed genuinely horrified. He hasn't even brought up the money again. He just wants his mother back. I looked at Camille, this woman who for years had treated me as an inconvenient obstacle, and I saw something I had never noticed before. Vulnerability, maybe even genuine remorse. You can tell Richard I'm willing to talk, I said finally, but not here, on neutral ground. He'll be so relieved. Thank you, Helen. As she was leaving, I asked one last question. Camille, why are you doing this? Did Richard ask you to come? She turned, her eyes suddenly moist. No, I'm doing this because for 2 weeks I haven't recognized my husband. Because he doesn't smile, doesn't sleep, barely eats. Because he looks at old photos and mutters, how could I have done this to her? Because... She hesitated, swallowing hard. Because why? I pressed gently. Because I'm pregnant. 3 months. And I don't want my child to grow up thinking it's acceptable to treat people the way we treated you. The news hit me like a lightning bolt. I was going to be a grandmother. A grandchild was on the way. A new life that was not to blame for the mistakes of the past. Congratulations, Camille, I managed to say, my voice softer than I intended. Thank you. We haven't told anyone yet, not even my mother. She smiled sadly. We wanted you to be the first to know, but then all this happened. After Camille left, I sat alone on the balcony, absorbing the news. A grandchild, a new generation, a chance, perhaps, to do things differently. 2 days later, I met Richard at a neutral coffee shop downtown, as we had agreed. He was already there when I arrived, sitting at a discreet table in the corner. He looked like he had aged years in just a few weeks. Deep-set dark circles. Worry lines that weren't there before. the stooped posture of someone carrying an invisible weight. Mother. He stood as I approached, his voice trembling. Thank you for coming. Richard, I greeted, sitting across from him. He watched me for a moment, as if truly seeing me for the first time in years. You look different. Not just the clothes or the hair. It's something more. It's called self-respect, son. I've found it's an excellent accessory. He smiled weakly, the first genuine smile I had seen on his face in a long time. Did you always have that wit, that sharp humor? Always. You just never paid attention. The smile vanished. You're right. I didn't pay attention to a lot of things. An uncomfortable silence settled between us. Richard nervously stirred his coffee, avoiding my gaze. Camille told me about the baby, I said finally, breaking the silence. He looked up, surprised. She went to see you? Yes. She was worried about you. She shouldn't have. She did what you should have done a long time ago, Richard. She acknowledged her mistakes and apologized. He hung his head, ashamed. I didn't know where to start, what to say, how to explain something I don't even fully understand myself. How about starting at the beginning, I suggested. Why, Richard? Why did you start treating me like a burden, an embarrassment? Did I do something to deserve that? He took a deep breath, his eyes moist. No, you did nothing but everything for me. He paused, visibly struggling to find the words. I think it started when I met Camille and her family. They had everything I always wanted: status, connections, a certain social polish. For the first time, I was being accepted into circles that always seemed unattainable, and I didn't fit into that new image I finished for him. It wasn't you, he insisted, then corrected himself. Well, it was, but not in the way you think. I was ashamed, yes, but not of you, specifically. I was ashamed of my background, of our struggle, of our history of hardship. Our history of overcoming, you mean? Yes, but I didn't see it that way at the time. I could only see the contrast between the life we had and the life Camille's family always had. And the more they accepted me, the more I felt I needed to distance myself from my past, from my simplicity, from you. He nodded, a tear finally escaping. From the one who loved me most, from the one who sacrificed everything for me. I was a monster, Mother. Yes, you were, I agreed bluntly. You treated me as if I were less than nothing, as if all my sacrifices meant nothing next to your mother-in-law's important last name, or your father-in-law's connections. I know, he whispered, another tear rolling down his cheek. And I don't know if I can ever forgive myself for it. It's not about your forgiveness, Richard. It's about mine, and I'm not sure I can give it yet. He looked up, startled. You can't forgive me? I didn't say that. I said I'm not sure. Forgiveness is a journey, son, not a destination, and some wounds are too deep to heal quickly. What can I do? He asked, his voice breaking. How can I fix this? I don't know if you can, I answered honestly. Some things, once broken, can never be what they were. We can glue the pieces back together, but the cracks will always be there. So there's no hope for us. I didn't say that. I said we won't be what we were before. Maybe we can be something different, something new, based on mutual respect, not on obligation or guilt. Richard nodded slowly, absorbing my words. Camille said you were supposed to be the first to know about the baby, if things had been different. Yes, she mentioned that. You're going to be a grandmother, he said, almost as if testing the words. Yes, I am. I paused, carefully considering what I would say next. And what kind of grandmother will I be, Richard? The one you visit on holidays out of obligation? The one who gets occasional photos but is never really included? Or a real presence in this child's life? I want you to be a part of his or her life, for real. Wanting is easy, Richard. Acting on that desire is the hard part. He extended a hesitant hand across the table, a pleading gesture. Can we try? Please. Not for what I did or didn't do, but for what we can be from now on. I looked at that hand, the same hand I had held when he took his first steps, the same hand I had kissed when he graduated, the same hand he had snatched away from mine on so many recent occasions. Slowly, I placed my hand on his. We'll try, I finally agreed. Not for you, not for me, but for this child who is coming. He or she deserves to know their grandmother, the real grandmother, not the caricature you created in your mind. Richard squeezed my hand, tears now flowing freely. Thank you, Mother. I'm going to try to be better. For you, for my child, for everyone. Don't try, I replied firmly. Be. There's a difference. In the months that followed our conversation at the coffee shop, I witnessed a gradual transformation in Richard. The changes began subtly. More frequent texts asking how I was, genuine invitations to lunches and dinners, small gestures that showed consideration. It wasn't a perfect process. There were setbacks, moments when the old Richard would emerge, like when he automatically assumed I'd be available to house sit during a work trip, or when a condescending comment about my newfound sophistication slipped out. But unlike before, he now noticed his mistakes, apologized, and tried to do better. Camille, surprisingly, was instrumental in this evolution. As her pregnancy progressed, she seemed increasingly determined to build a genuine relationship with me. It started with small invitations, to help her choose colors for the nursery, to accompany her to prenatal appointments when Richard couldn't. I know I don't deserve your generosity, she told me during one of these outings, but thank you for giving me a second chance. Regina, the mother-in-law who had received $100,000 while I got a $10 gift certificate, remained distant for some time. When we finally met again, at a lunch at Richard and Camille's house, she seemed like a more subdued version of herself. Your house is truly impressive, Helen, she commented during the meal, visibly uncomfortable. Camille told me you have a remarkable collection of contemporary American art. I do, I replied calmly. I started collecting a few months ago. I discovered I have a natural eye for it. Impressive, she murmured, clearly struggling to reconcile the image she had of me with the reality now before her. Richard watched our interaction with visible anxiety. Mother is much more than any of us ever imagined, he said, in a rare moment of public defense. She always was. It was a small moment, but a significant one. For the first time, my son was seeing me, truly seeing me, and defending my worth to others. When Camille entered her 7th month of pregnancy, Richard made an unexpected request. We were having coffee on my balcony, enjoying the evening breeze, when he casually mentioned, "We're thinking of names for the baby. If it's a girl, we'd like to name her Helen." The surprise must have been evident on my face, because he quickly continued, "Only if you'll allow it, of course. I understand if you find it strange." "Why Helen?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady despite the sudden emotion. "Because we want our daughter to have her grandmother's strength, integrity, and perseverance," he answered simply. "We want her to know where she comes from, to know her real history, not the edited version I almost imposed." I swallowed hard, fighting back tears. "I would be honored, Richard." He smiled, a genuine smile I rarely saw on his adult face. Thank you, Mother. In the 8th month, something happened that would have been unthinkable a year earlier. Camille called me in a panic. She was having premature contractions, and Richard was at a conference in another state. Can you take me to the hospital? She asked, her voice trembling. I don't want to call my mother. She'll panic and just make things worse. I'm on my way, I replied without hesitation. I arrived in 15 minutes, finding Camille pale and frightened. On the way to the hospital, I held her hand as she breathed through the contractions. I'm scared, she confessed. It's too soon. Everything is going to be all right, I assured her, with a conviction I didn't know I possessed. You're strong, Camille, and this little girl is my granddaughter. She has warrior blood in her veins. At the hospital, I stayed by her side through the tests, the monitoring, the consultations with specialists. When the doctor finally confirmed that they were just Braxton Hicks contractions, false labor, and that both Camille and the baby were fine, I cried with relief right along with her. Thank you for being here, she said, squeezing my hand. I don't know what I would have done without you. That's what family is for, I replied, surprising both of us. Richard arrived a few hours later, pale with worry. He found us in the waiting room, Camille already discharged, chatting calmly. Are you okay? He asked, hugging his wife carefully. The baby? We're perfectly fine, Camille reassured him. Your mother took care of everything. She was incredible. Richard looked at me with a gratitude so deep it was painful. Thank you, Mother, for being here when I couldn't. I always was, son, I replied softly. You just didn't see it. On the way to their house, in the back seat of the car, I heard Richard whisper to Camille, I don't deserve that woman as my mother. No, Camille agreed, but you can start deserving her from now on. When little Helen was born, punctually on her due date to everyone's relief, I was the first person Richard called after the delivery. Not Regina, not Camille's father, but me. She's perfect, Mother, he said, his voice choked with emotion over the phone. She has your eyes and your stubborn chin. I arrived at the hospital carrying a small teddy bear, not an extravagant gift, just something simple and meaningful. When I walked into the room and saw my son holding that tiny pink bundle, something shifted. All the grudges, all the resentments, all the pain accumulated over the years seemed to momentarily dissolve. Do you want to hold her? Richard asked, already extending the baby in my direction. I took my granddaughter in my arms, gazing at that perfect face, those curious eyes that already seemed to be observing the world with intensity. Hello, Helen, I whispered. I'm your grandmother, and you will never, ever doubt your worth. Richard placed a hand on my shoulder, a simple but meaningful gesture. She's going to have the best grandmother in the world, and this time, I promise everyone will know it. As I cradled that new life in my arms, I thought about the journey that had brought me here, the pain, the humiliation, the courage it took to finally demand respect. It wasn't a perfect fairy tale happy ending. It was something more complex, more real, an imperfect reconciliation, a new beginning built on the ruins of the old. In the days following Helen's birth, I watched as the family dynamic subtly changed. Regina showed up at the hospital, of course, laden with expensive and extravagant gifts, clearly competing for attention and relevance. But I noticed how Richard and Camille maintained firm boundaries, polite, but unequivocal. Mum, we appreciate the designer clothes, but we really don't need so many, Camille said gently but firmly. Helen is going to grow quickly, and we prefer more practical things right now. But she needs to look presentable, Regina protested, glancing meaningfully at the simple teddy bear I had brought. Appearance is important from an early age. Appearance is the least important of the qualities we want to teach our daughter, Richard replied, much to my surprise. We want her to value substance over status, exactly as my mother always has. The look of shock on Regina's face was priceless. Even more surprising was the fact that Richard didn't back down or soften his stance, as he would have in the past. When they brought the baby home, I was invited to stay for a few days to help. I initially hesitated. I didn't want to impose, but Camille insisted. "Please, Helen," she asked, with a sincerity that still surprised me. "I need someone who actually understands babies, not someone who just wants to show off her granddaughter on social media." I accepted, and those days were revealing. I saw how Richard genuinely strove to be a present father, even when exhausted after long days at the hospital. I saw how Camille fought against her own insecurities, trying to be a different kind of mother than the model she had known. And I saw how silently they both began to value me not just as a convenient grandmother, but as a source of wisdom and support. "How did you do it when I was a baby?" Richard asked me one night, as he tried to soothe a crying, inconsolable Helen. "Was I like this too?" "Worse," I replied with a smile. "You would only calm down when I sang that old lullaby, remember? The one my grandmother taught me." Richard looked at me, a distant memory surfacing in his eyes. "The one about the stars and little boats?" "That's the one. Do you still remember it?" I held out my arms, taking little Helen. I began to sing softly the same melody that had lulled my son to sleep decades earlier. The baby stopped crying almost instantly, her little eyes fixed on me as the voice and gentle rocking soothed her. "It's almost like magic," Camille whispered, watching in awe. "It's not magic," I replied. "It's connection. It's unconditional love passed down through generations." Richard watched the scene with unshed tears in his eyes. Later, when Camille and Helen were finally asleep, he found me in the kitchen making tea. "Mother," he began, his voice trembling. "How can you? How can you be here, helping us, after everything we did?" I thought carefully before answering. "I'm not here for you, Richard, or even for Camille. I'm here for Helen, for myself, and for the kind of family I want to help build from now on." "You still haven't completely forgiven me," he observed. It wasn't an accusation, just a statement of fact. "Forgiveness is a process, son, not an event. I'm on my way, but some wounds take a long time to fully heal." He nodded, accepting my honesty. "Do you know what hurts the most? It's not just the way I treated you these last few years. It's thinking about everything I lost, conversations we could have had, advice I could have received, moments I wasted because I was too busy trying to impress people who never really cared about me." "We can't get back lost time," I replied softly. "But we can decide how to use the time we have ahead of us. Do you think we can ever have the relationship we should have had?" I looked at my son, not the arrogant neurosurgeon who had humiliated me on my birthday, but the vulnerable, repentant man who was trying to find his way back. "No," I answered honestly. "We can't have the relationship we should have had, but we can build something new, something based on who we are now, not who we were before." He absorbed my words in silence, finally nodding. "Thank you for not giving up on me, Mother, even when I deserved it." Mothers don't give up, Richard, even when they should. In the following months, our relationship continued to evolve, not without difficulties, of course. There were setbacks, occasional slips into old patterns. Richard still had flashes of arrogance. Camille occasionally showed traces of the elitism she was raised with. But the crucial difference was that now, when it happened, there was acknowledgement, there were genuine apologies, there was a real effort to do better. Regina, on the other hand, had a harder time adapting. The shift in the family dynamic, where she was no longer the supreme matriarchal figure, clearly made her uncomfortable. Helen has been spending a lot of time with the baby, I heard her comment once to one of her friends. It's almost as if she's trying to claim my granddaughter. Our granddaughter, Regina, I corrected calmly, walking into the room at that moment. And I'm not claiming anyone. I'm simply being a grandmother. She blushed, caught off guard. I didn't mean, it's just that you seem to be around so much lately. As are you, I replied, keeping my voice neutral. Fortunately, Helen has enough love for all her grandmothers. It was a small moment of confrontation, but a significant one. Regina realized she could no longer talk about me as if I weren't present, could no longer belittle me without consequence. Regina and her husband's financial situation also went through significant changes during that period. The problems Camille had mentioned became public when her father's company filed for bankruptcy. Suddenly, the extravagant lunches and expensive gifts ceased. The beach house, which was never purchased, became an even more distant dream. We're going through a restructuring phase, Regina would explain, trying to keep up appearances. It's just a temporary cash flow issue. But the whispers in their social circles told another story, of failed investments, accumulated debts, of a facade of prosperity that hid years of financial mismanagement. In a strange role reversal, Richard and Camille now occasionally helped Regina and her husband, not with large sums, like the $100,000 they had once given her, but with small, practical gestures, paying for a dinner, offering to cover some bills. It's ironic, isn't it? Camille commented to me one afternoon as we watched Helen play in my garden. My parents always seemed so invincible, as if money and status were guaranteed. Now I see it was all an illusion. Money is like that, I replied, thinking of my own choices throughout life. It comes and goes. What remains is character, the bonds we build, the impact we have on the lives we touch. Camille looked at me with an expression that mixed admiration and sadness. You always knew that, didn't you? While the rest of us were busy chasing status, you were building something real. It wasn't always a conscious choice, I admitted. At first, I saved out of necessity, later, out of habit. Only recently did I realize that I had built security while others were building appearances. When Helen turned 1, Richard and Camille organized an intimate celebration, just close family and a few dear friends. To my surprise, I was invited to help with the preparations from the very beginning. We want something meaningful, not ostentatious, Richard explained. Something that reflects real values, not fake sophistication. The party was held in my backyard, a choice that would have been unthinkable a year earlier. Regina showed up with an elaborately wrapped gift, an expensive imported doll that Helen was too young to appreciate. She clearly expected to be the center of attention. Instead, she witnessed how her daughter and son-in-law had changed, how the small celebration was filled with meaning instead of extravagance, how the maternal grandmother, once an embarrassment to be hidden, was now treated with evident respect, her opinions valued, her presence clearly cherished. After the guests had left, it was just us, Richard, Camille, little Helen and me, sitting on the balcony as the sun set. "Thank you, Mother," Richard said softly, breaking the comfortable silence. "For this house, for this day, for everything." "You don't need to thank me," I responded automatically. "I need to," he insisted. "For a long time, I believed that valuing you was an obligation, something to be done out of convenience or custom. Now I understand that it's a privilege." Camille, holding a sleeping Helen, nodded in agreement. "I hope that one day our daughter looks at me with the same respect Richard is learning to have for you, that she sees value beyond appearances, substance beyond status. She will, I assured them, because you are teaching her that every day, with your choices, with your actions. As I looked at my family, this new version of my family, rebuilt from the ashes of disappointment and resentment, I felt a strange sense of peace. It wasn't a perfect ending. Richard still had a long way to go to prove the consistency of his remorse. Camille still fought against the distorted values she was raised with. Regina would probably never change completely, but something fundamental had changed. I had reclaimed my voice, my power, my dignity. I was no longer the inconvenient mother to be hidden, the old woman to be tolerated, the poor relative to be ashamed of. I was Helen, a woman of worth, deserving of respect, capable of setting boundaries and defending her own value. And my granddaughter, little Helen, would grow up knowing that. She would grow up seeing her grandmother as an example of strength, not as a footnote in the family history. She would grow up understanding that real value comes from character, not from a bank account. That respect is earned through actions, not appearances. A year and a half after Helen's birth, my life had found a new balance. My relationship with Richard and Camille continued to evolve, still imperfect, still with occasional moments of tension, but unequivocally better. Little Helen, now babbling her first words and taking wobbly steps, became a constant presence in my home. Richard and Camille brought her over regularly, often leaving her with me while they ran errands. "Are you sure you don't mind?" Camille would always ask, even though she knew the answer. "Mind? These are my favorite moments of the week," I would answer honestly. The relationship between Richard and Regina, on the other hand, had become noticeably more distant. Not because of my influence, I never asked or suggested that he distance himself from his mother-in-law, but as a natural consequence of the changes in his own perspective. "She still makes condescending comments about your simplicity," he told me one afternoon, clearly irritated after a lunch at his in-laws' house. As if living without ostentation is some kind of moral failing. "Regina is a product of her upbringing, just like all of us," I replied, trying to maintain perspective. "She measures worth by what can be displayed, not by what truly matters." "Even so, I don't need to expose my daughter to those values," he said firmly. "Helen deserves better." It was in this context that I received an unexpected visit. I was at home, organizing photo albums of little Helen, when the housekeeper announced, "Mrs. Regina is here, ma'am. She says she needs to speak with you urgently." Surprised, I authorized her entry. Regina appeared at the living room doorway, clearly uncomfortable, looking older than the last time I had seen her. Her usual air of superiority had been replaced by something that looked almost like humility. "Helen," she greeted formally. "I hope I'm not interrupting." "Not at all," I replied, gesturing for her to sit. "Would you like some coffee?" She nodded, visibly nervous. While we waited for the housekeeper to bring the coffee, a tense silence hung between us. Regina looked around, taking in the details of my living room. The elegant, but not ostentatious furniture, the carefully selected art, the atmosphere of quiet prosperity. "You have a beautiful home," she finally commented. "Cozy, yet sophisticated." "Thank you," I replied, genuinely surprised by the compliment. The coffee arrived, and after a few moments of superficial conversation, Regina finally got to the reason for her visit. "I came to ask for your help," she said abruptly, clearly forcing the words out. "And I know I have no right to ask this, given how things were in the past." I waited in silence, giving her space to continue. "My husband's financial situation has worsened significantly," she explained, her eyes fixed on her coffee cup. "The company went bankrupt. We're selling the house to pay off debts, and I don't know what to do." The confession but clearly cost her a great deal. For a woman who had built her entire identity around social status and the appearance of wealth, admitting financial ruin was almost like admitting moral defeat. "I'm very sorry to hear about your situation," I replied sincerely, "but I don't understand how I can help." She took a deep breath, as if gathering courage. "I need advice on how to live with less, how to manage real finances, not just appearances, and I don't know anyone who has done that better than you." The irony of the situation was not lost on me. The woman who had looked down on me for my simplicity was now coming to ask for advice on how to live without ostentation. "Are you asking me for financial advice?" I asked, wanting to be sure I had understood correctly. "Yes," she confirmed, her cheeks flushed with shame. "Richard mentioned that you have an exceptional financial advisor, and that even before that, you were always prudent with money." I considered her situation for a moment. It would be easy, temptingly easy, to refuse her, to return some of the coldness and disdain she had shown me for years. But what kind of example would that be for my granddaughter? What lesson would it teach about compassion and overcoming adversity? "I can introduce you to my advisor," I said finally, "and I can share some strategies that worked for me over the years." Regina looked up, clearly surprised by my willingness to help. "I would appreciate that, very much. But I need to ask you, Regina, are you coming to me only out of financial need, or is there something more to this?" She was silent for a long moment, as if weighing the question. "Initially, yes, it was out of need," she admitted finally. "But there is something more. I've watched Richard and Camille these last few months, how they've changed, how they seem happier, more centered. And I realized it has something to do with the influence you've had on them." "I don't know if I deserve that credit," I replied honestly. "You do," she insisted. "They talk about different values now, about raising Helen to understand that character matters more than possessions, about building real relationships, not strategic connections." She paused, visibly uncomfortable. "Those were things I didn't teach Camille, things I didn't value." Her sincerity took me by surprise. For the first time, I saw Regina not as the arrogant mother-in-law who had facilitated my son's estrangement, but as a woman facing the demolition of the entire value system she had believed in. "It's never too late to relearn priorities," I said softly. "Believe me, I know from experience." In the following months, Regina and I developed an unlikely relationship. We weren't friends. There was too much history for that. But we found a mutual respect that would have been unthinkable before. I helped her navigate the transition to a less opulent life, to identify what was truly important to keep and what was just empty showmanship. Her husband ended up getting a modest job at a smaller company, a devastating blow to his ego, but a necessary financial relief. They sold the mansion and moved into a comfortable apartment, but without the luxuries they were used to. "It's strange," she confided in me during one of our meetings. "I thought I would feel diminished, humiliated, but there's a certain freedom in no longer needing to constantly keep up appearances." Richard and Camille watched this evolution with poorly disguised amazement. "I never thought I'd see my mother and you having coffee together voluntarily," Camille commented one afternoon. "Life has its surprises," I replied with a smile. When Helen turned 2, we celebrated again at my house. This time, Regina brought a simple gift, a children's book that she herself had read to Camille as a child. The gesture, in its modest sincerity, said more than any extravagant gift ever could. During the party, I found Richard watching the scene thoughtfully, his daughter playing in the garden, Camille and Regina chatting amicably with me, the few genuine guests enjoying the moment without a care for status or appearances. "What are you thinking about?" I asked, approaching him. "About how everything changed," he answered, his voice soft. about how I almost lost all of this because of pride and superficiality. But you didn't lose it, I reminded him. We're all here. Thanks to you, he said, taking my hand. Thanks to your courage to demand respect, to show your worth. And thanks to your ability to change, to recognize your mistakes, to do better, I added. Not everyone manages that. He smiled, a genuine smile I now saw frequently on his face. I think this deserves a special celebration. Wait here. He went inside the house, returning moments later with a small, wrapped box. I was going to save this for Christmas, but I think this is the perfect moment. I opened the package to find a delicate white gold bracelet inside. It wasn't ostentatious or showy, but elegant in its simplicity. I turned it over in my hands, noticing an inscription on the inside. For the woman who taught me the true value of things. It's beautiful, Richard, I said, genuinely touched. It didn't cost $100,000, he observed, referring to the amount he had given Regina years before. But it has infinitely more meaning. It's not the price that matters, is it? I replied, putting on the bracelet. It's the intention, the recognition. He nodded in understanding. I know that now, and I hope to teach that to Helen too. As I watched my granddaughter running through the garden, my son finally becoming the man I always knew he could be, Camille, finding her own worth beyond her parents' superficial expectations, and even Regina belatedly learning lessons about what truly matters in life, I felt a deep sense of gratitude. Not for the money that had allowed me to buy this house and force my son to finally see me. Not for the sweet revenge of showing my worth to those who had belittled me, but for the entire journey, the pains that strengthened me, the humiliation that taught me to value myself, and above all, for the courage I found at 65 to finally say, I deserve more than this. That $10 gift certificate on my birthday, compared to the $100,000 given to Regina, had been the greatest humiliation of my life. But now, looking back, I realized it had also been the greatest gift, the catalyst that forced me to see my own worth, to demand it from others, and to rebuild my family on foundations more solid than status or appearances. At 67, I had finally found not only external respect, but something far more precious, self-respect. And that, I realized as I watched my family gathered together, was the true victory, the sweetest turn of events I could have ever imagined.